So, good afternoon, both. So, today we are going to see about uh, predominantly on the homework 2 and homework 3. So, last week we have seen the first homework, and this week I will give some kind of hints on the second and third so that you can do it on your own. And let me share my screen once. So, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, the second homework is about partition. So, before jumping on to what exactly you need to do, I would like to give some kind of theoretical understanding of this. So, partition is nothing but you can take it like splitting off of the table into a smaller tables. That's a major definition of partition. So, why we are doing it? So, why we need to split the table? So, if you have some kind of a table which has, for example, 100,000 data or 200,000 data, and if your user is trying to query the data from the table. For example, we can take a customer table. Okay, there are 100,000 customers in the orders table. So if a user is trying to fetch the details of the customer from the customer table, if we write select star from customer, the entire data will be loaded to the database. Okay, it will fetch all the details from the database, and the execution time will be huge. Some might think, okay, I will put select star from customer and I will put only the customer name. In fact, that time also, the SQL has to go row by row to check that particular ID and it has to fetch it. So that also will take a huge time. And if you consider a scenario where there are like more than 20, 30 users concurrently and they're accessing your database in parallel, there is a possibility that it might affect the performance of the database. So that is why we will partition the table into multiple smaller pods, and in this way it will make the query to run faster, and obviously it will not affect any performance, and it can be so ultimately it can be fetched quickly compared to other ways. And one more problem is if you have a lot of data in your database, so and it is also difficult to maintain in a way. So that is the reason why we do a partitioning. And so before I go anywhere, I will just open this PG admin in parallel. So basically there are two types of partitioning. One is the vertical partitioning and the other one is the horizontal partitioning. So vertical is nothing but splitting different columns. Okay, for example, you have customer details again, the name, age and address and city and pin code or whatever. So instead of having all the details in a single table, we can just partition this table into two tables. You can say name and age uh, and some gender in one table, and the address and the city or pin code or whatever is there on the other table. So if we do that kind of partitioning, then it's called vertical partitioning. And if you do horizontally, I mean row by row, for example, we can partition based on region. For example, I will partition Finland as a separate table, whatever information about Germany and in a different table. So if I partition the table in a different way, I mean based on a region, then I can do a horizontal partitioning. So these are the two things, and there are some real life examples in a partitioning. So for example, when I was working with a client, so they used to manufacture artificial medical implants. Okay, so artificial medical implant in the sense, yeah, I'm not sharing any screen because I'm loading the PG admin, so I'm just giving some time for it. So artificial medical implants in the sense, if you get any accident or something, there is a possibility like they will fix with your plastic or some kind of steel equipments in your hand. So I was working for some of the clients, so they're used to manufacture around 170 to 100,000 devices per day. So those many devices will be manufactured every day, and those details will be saved in the database. See the amount of data which they are collecting. So because of that, it is always ideal to have a partition table to save the latest data instead of saving all the data. So for example, if the customer tries to fetch the details of what has been manufactured, if you have all the data for an entire month, calculate how much data will the database hold. So during the time, what we used to do, we used to partition table based on the dates. So if a customer fetches, he will be able to see only the 10 days or 15 days data. He will not be able to see the older data. Older data we will be saving in the secondary database. So there are some possibilities, like it will have so much impact on your application if you are not partitioning the table, if you are handling a huge amount of data for say. So that is a major use case if you are using for a partition. Okay, if you don't use a partition in your table, uh, let, one second, pgadmin finally loaded. So yes, I guess you can see my pgadmin screen. So why if there is no partitioning of table or optimizing of table, there are two things which might happen. One is that performance issue, and other one is the deadlock, which we already discussed in the previous session. So it is basically like, if I am a user and I am trying to fetch a details which has a lot of data, the query will take its own time. For example, it will take some 40-50 seconds compared to microseconds. But in the meanwhile, if other user tries to fetch the same detail, it might end up in a deadlock situation, and the user might not be able to fetch the detail and it will throw some kind of error. So to avoid those things, we are partitioning. And some might argue that there is condition called no lock, which can be used to avoid this deadlock, but that will not be suitable because it will fetch only the partial amount of data per se. So that is also not an ideal situation. So partitioning is one of the better features to handle this kind of huge amount of data. And for our assignment, I mean, we need to focus on, there are three types of partition. I mean, apart from the general category, there are three types. So one is the list, then the range, and the hash. So currently you don't need to worry about the hash, which handles some kind of modulus operation or something. I even haven't personally used this, and this will be suited mostly when we cannot use range. So let's discuss what is list and range first. List can be used, for example, when we are trying to partition the data based on countries or a particular employee role or something like that. For example, developers will be separated in a different table, testers will be in a different table, something like that. If you are using those kind of, if you want to save those kind of information, then you can use list partition. If you are using time range, for example, between this time and this time, between yesterday and today, between 2 days before and within the next week. So if you are using time and dates, you can use range. Suppose you are not able to if you are not able if you want to separate the table which has some kind of information like employee id, or what we can say product id or something, something with numbers, but it's not a date. So those kind of operation can be handled using hash, but currently you don't need to worry about the hash, which we will not use it in our assignment actually. So you don't need to worry about that. So ideally how it works, so the syntax for partitioning is, so we will be creating some table, okay, and table name, and we will put all the information about the table here, like whatever the id, name, or whatever, country, etc, etc, and the data type of it. And at the end we will write partition by list or range, and we will tell what particular column we are trying to do. For example, in this case, if you are partitioning by list, then I will select country as my partition. But in case if I am selecting the range, I will be selecting date column as my partition. So you have to be very careful with what you are trying to partition. So in case of a date, you try to do it in range. In case of some other factors, you can try to do it in list. That is one thing. And there are some cases where you would have already created a table, but you need to partition thereafter. So you can use always alter table and add the partition on whichever column you want. So that is the altering of a partition. And you can also drop, I mean, you can. So ideally what happens after you partition? So for example, in this example, I have partitioned using date. Okay, that will create a new table with a new table name as a partition table. So if I don't want any partition in the table, I can just drop that particular new table. So if I created a table called table 1 as a partition table, I can just drop that table 1 so that the partition will be removed. And we can also detach it, if I am not wrong, detach the partition, I guess. So these are the syntax which you need to know for partitioning of the table. Okay, but we will try to create a partition for, I mean, we will go through the example which is given in our assignment, and I will explain in a yeah. So this is the table which was given for you, and you can see partition by range, and we have selected the order date. Order date is a daytime variable, so it's a timestamp, and we are partitioning by order date, and it has only one partition currently because we are partitioning this one. And in case you want to partition the same partition in I mean kind of a sub partition, if you see the question here, the fifth one, the fourth one, sorry, the create to partition of the first partition. So for example, this is the first partition, this is the first table, and the partition by order date, we will create a table. And if you want to create one more partition, you have to create the sub partition of that partition. I mean, after this, we will create a partition table like create partition table, create table, and the partition table name, whatever. Okay, of orders, which we are taking from there, and we can assume some values for values from some dates we can mention from this and this. So it is basically like we are saying create a partition table which can be x, y, z or something, whatever, of order table. Okay, for values from, we can assume some dates. For example, we can give this date to this date. So what it will happen, it will create a table called xyz, which is a partition table of this main table. Okay, so in case you want to split this table again, so we will add again create table, and we will put sub partition that as a table name, and of xyz for values or whatever whatever condition we need. So like this we can create. So if you see this case, this is again a table we are creating, but it's a sub partition of this table. It is not from the main table. So that is the partition in between, inside a partition. So that is the sub partition which I am talking about. And I guess you can also rename the table actually. Alter command can be used to rename alter table orders. Rename can be used to rename to new table or something, and you can use detach to detach the partition from the main table. So these are the some of the, I would say, the some of the commands which can be used, or the syntax which can be used. So for the first question, as I said earlier, you can use, I almost gave the answer, I believe. So you can use this syntax for calculating this four value. You can give just the dates and stuff. And for the third and the second one, alter the third partition where the freight cost is higher than 50. So we are trying to add a constraint. So you can, as I said earlier, you can change the, I would say that, change the features of the table, whatever. If you want to add a column, if you want to change the data type or whatever, if you want, you can use the alter table. We can alter table order or whatever the new table may be, x, y, z, and we can say add constraint, and we can add a check, and inside check we can add all the conditions which we are seeking. So for example, here we can add the freight cost can be higher than 50 or whatever the condition we need, we can just add it here. So that is how we can add. And the C condition is alter the fourth partition, and again we are adding a constraint that the ship date should be null. So here we are saying the ship date should be null. So we can use the same thing, and maybe instead of check, we are not checking, we can set that particular column to null or something like that. So that would work. So, and this one we already saw, we can create partition after the I mean inside the partition, one another. And how many rows? I guess everybody knows we can use either count to count the number of rows from the table, or so for example, if you put select star count star from xyz, it will give the number of rows for the column. So these are the different syntaxes which can be used. To sum up, order is our main table. To add a partition, this is a syntax. You have to create a table, and this is a partitions table new name of which the main table, and this is the range which we are giving, because we already specified it as a range partition. And if you want to specify sub partition, we are going to create a table inside a table using this. And if you want to change the name of the table, you can use this. And if you want to add constraint, you can use this condition, and select count star will give you the count of it. And one more thing is the detach partition or something. So this will detach the partition from your tables. For example, uh, we need to change partition. So can consider this example orders. Okay. In this orders table, instead of range order date, I want to give ship country and list. So that's a partition I'm changing. So before altering the partition, I will just drop the existing partition. Like I will just alter table orders, and I will just use detach partition maybe. Okay. So that this orders table will not have any partitions. It will come as a entire table like this. And after that, I will alter the table and add partition here, or either way you can just drop, or you can use drop to do that. That will also work. So I can just add partition and tell what column I need to have a partition of. So this is how you can work on this partition homework on based on this commands. And do you have any comments or questions or doubts on this? Please let me know. Or is it, if it is clear also, you can let me know. If it is clear. Hello. Yes, okay, I mean, if I create it, it will be an answer actually. Uh, I mean, I can give an example, but if I do this for this example, then it will result in the answers, for example. So basically, I will tell you what you are supposed to do. Then, in that case, I will not tell exactly what it can be done. So, for example, you can just copy the table and create it in your PG admin. Then you try to insert all the data. Okay. For example, I will try to insert only this. Uh-huh. So you can just run it so that you have some data. Failing. I didn't copy perfectly or what? Sorry. So I added the table. Now I will add some data to it. There is some error. I don't know what it is, but so after adding this, I will tell you what you are supposed to do. So once you have added, you need to create a partition, right? So you can create table and give the partition table's name. Okay, that's why I double quoted it. So of the main table, which is orders, okay, for values from, you can put the start date, okay, to end date. This is literally the first, I would say the A option, I guess. The A question of it, the first one. So you have to put this value in between and it will create a partition. That's how it works. So is that fine? Right. What happened? So I guess the homework 2 is okay. And we will jump on to 3. And 3 again handles with the same table orders. Okay. So that's why I decided to do this 2 in a single session. So 3 is basically stored procedure. Stored procedure is nothing but, so little bit of theory before starting to exercise. So store procedure is nothing but it's similar to functions. Okay, it's almost similar. I won't say it's similar. Almost similar with little changes, but you can consider store procedure as a function. So whatever arithmetic operation or whatever operation you want to do it in a function, you can do the same thing in store procedure of SQL. That will have some kind of operation, for example, addition, subtraction, or some other operation uh, before the query executes or after the query execute. You can just call this function to update the database. So it is similar to the function. By default, SQL, this PG admin will support C and I forgot what is the other language. There is one more, that PGSQL language, PLGSQL. These are default language it can support, but using extension you can also use Perl or Python to use it. So coming for the template, I would I can show you with an example for this store procedure, I guess, so that it will be better. But before that, I will show you the syntax for creating a store procedure. So it's basically create procedure, and I believe procedure name. Yeah. And similar to function, what we do, we need to give the parameters for the function. We can uh, do some kind of stored procedure without giving any parameters, but ideally we should have some kind of inputs. So this is where we will give all the parameters required. Okay, it's kind of an input. So after that, it's typical, I guess, language, and we will mention what is a language. In this case, we will do PLPGSQL, I guess. Yes. Then there is the ask command, and we will start the double asterisk, double dollars. Then we have the declare. So under the declare or after the declare variable, we will have all the variable declaration. So for example, apart from these input parameters, if you have any other additional variable names, you can declare it here for the function. It's almost, as I said already, it's almost similar, work similar to the function. So you can declare all the variable here, and within the begin and end, here is the operation which you will be declaring, or which you will be adding here. So whatever this store procedure has to function, for example, it has to update some information in some table, or delete, or fetch some information. All this information can be added within this begin and end, and then we have to close the double dollar symbol. I believe that's it. And this is the general syntax of creating a store procedure. And after that, if you want to call the store procedure in your query window, you need to tell call and give the store procedure name. Okay. For example, in this case, we have wrote procedure name or something, so we can just say call procedure name. And one more thing I forgot. Actually, after the function, for example, if your store procedure is just fetching the information from your database, then you don't need to add a thing called commit or something. Okay. But if your store procedure is performing some operation to the table, so then we need to have a commit so that the changes will be reflected permanently into the database. So if you don't add a commit, it will just reflect in your table, but it will not store permanently. But you have to use a commit so that it will store permanently. So commit you have to use. Uh, so if you see your homework, first I will explain the homework a bit, and then we can have a simple example of, I will create some small store procedure so that it will be easy. So for your homework, we need to create a store procedure that adds X amount of days to the required date value based on customer ID or order ID. Okay, if order ID is given null, then the procedure should run based on customer ID. So in this case, as you can understand, the argument, it has mentioned three arguments. So what are the three arguments? One is the number of days, X amount. Okay. Okay, if the meeting closes, please rejoin in the same meeting. We can continue in the same meeting. So if the procedure, if it says X amount of days, for example, if you are giving input 20 days, it should add 20 days to the required date value based on the order ID or the customer ID. So either it's based on this or this. Okay, if the user gives this as an input, for this particular value, you can just add 20 more days. if it is given customer ID, if it is given null and only the customer ID is there, you can add based on that. So the arguments are customer ID, order ID, and the number of days. That is the first thing. And the second question is create a procedure that adds 10% freight money is, I would say, uh, it's basically to add to every orders, every value. All, so for example, consider this particular value. Okay, the first one is the order ID, second one is the customer, 5 is the employee ID, order date is this, record date is this, shipper date is this, shipper ID is this, freight is this. Okay, so freight is 32.38 and 11.61. So we need to add 10% of freight money to all those things. So either we can do it like take this value, multiply into 10 divided by 100 and add those value to again to the same, or I believe there's some kind of condition like we can do it into 110 divided by 100 or something like that, or 11 into 10 or something, 11 by 10 or something like that. There is some condition we can use. And the third one is we need to create a procedure to round the freight cost to nearly 10. So for example, if we consider this, the nearest to 10 is 30 and this nearest 10 is 10. So we need to create a procedure for that. And the third one is add a new column, and we need to create a boolean saying uh, whether it's true or false or something we need to say. So for this one we can as we saw it before, for adding a new column we can use alter command. We can use the alter command and say the table name and add a new column. After adding that, we can either use a round maybe, and we can just check whether the ship date is less than required date or something. If it is not there, we can just say it false or true. So based on that we can based on those condition we can create this. But uh okay, we have 6 minutes. So what we can do, I will just stop the meeting and I will start it again so that it will start again the 40 minutes. Unfortunately, I don't have a premium account with Zoom. So every time I start a meeting with a group of 5 people or more than 3 people, it will close within 40 minutes. So let's join the same meeting again. I will just stop sharing and close it, and we can join it again and continue the store procedure if that's okay.